did you feel? You would just pretty much dedicate your life, put your life on the line, and then they told you weren't good enough afterwards.
Well, I was pretty bitter. You know, at that period, you had to know America was a different place than it is today, believe me. You know, even in the North, prejudice was pretty rampant. Even when I was in that clothing industry, for example, they wouldn't let me in the union as a cutter, you know, which paid very well. I'd always have to be what they call a fitting person. You set up groups of fitting, but you weren't able to do the cutting officially. But I was taught that and did it, and the union spent an inordinate amount of time trying to catch me cutting so they could penalize the particular business. But and so I was coached by one of the guys who was in the union, who was really a friend, and he got me so that I was, you know, I hit the boss up for a raise for basic union level, you know, price-wise. So I had a pretty good job when I left for the service. So probably would have gone back to that career, but at that time they first found out that, and by the way, veterans had priority getting their jobs back. So when I went to back to that factory, the supervisor, that was my friend, took me out for lunch and says, "Hey, don't come back." I said, "What? Why? I need to get some money." He says, "You can go to school, go to school." He said, "But look, I have TB, tuberculosis." He said, "And they think it's from the fibers, you know, being around this stuff full-time, clothing industry." He says, "And one of the other guys we think he's got a terrible cough too." I said, I didn't know whether he was trying to put me off or not, but the guy had always been so honest and neat with me. And sure enough, it turned out he had died within, well, maybe 5 years of the time we talked from tuberculosis. So I was a hazard of the industry at the time. So I'm glad I didn't go back. But
you had been talking earlier about a training.
Yeah, one of the incidents that happened in training, of which they're, you know, considerable, but one, when I flew this AT-6, which was just a tremendous airplane, 650 horsepower after flying this little 200 job, and it was so neat. When I first soloed, you're assigned to go out in these different areas and practice. So I took off that morning, and there was nobody else in the practice area, so I decided to go down and check out the treetops. So anyway, I'm flying along a road, and a car's coming towards me. I said, "I'm going to buzz him," you know. And so I go down real close, and all of a sudden, I just look and I see a car come from the opposite direction, and they hit head on. And geez, I'm thinking, geez, maybe they were probably looking at me and ran into each other. So I kind of circled up around, came back to see how badly they might have been hurt. And I called, I was going to call the tower and tell them it was an accident. Well, before I could do that, a shadow goes over my canopy, and I look up, and sure enough, here's an instructor. And it turns out later he was flying a low-level cross-country group, 5 aircraft, and they're supposed to be flying at 500 feet, which we're not supposed to go below, right? I was way below him when he caught me. So anyway, I tried to outmaneuver him to get away so he couldn't read my number, but he was much more experienced than me. He picked up my number, and I heard him call it in. So anyway, he tried to get me to talk to him on the other frequency. I refused to switch over. So anyway, I finished my practice term and went back to the operations office, operations barracks. And as I walked in, I knew I was in trouble because 2 or 3 apparently had been reported. He called it in, and everybody knew it. So I casually walked in, and they said, you got to report to the skipper, you know. Oh, okay. So it was the first time I've ever been in the inner sanctum here in this office, sat there with the door closed all the time. We heard about this guy called the Hawk. And the Hawk was all kinds of stories about the guy. And one of them was that if you ever flew him for a check ride, you were automatically washed out. That was automatically the end of your training. So I go in his office, and here sits behind the desk a fairly handsome gentleman at one time, but his face was all pieced together. It looked like almost like a little Frankenstein type operation, you know. And the word was that he'd been in an accident. He did the thing you're taught never to do. He lost an engine on takeoff. You're told never to turn back. You know, chances of spinning in are too great. You fly straight ahead even if you have to land in trees. But look for a clearing. Well, he tried to come back, and he spun in, and it really tore up his face. And the legend goes that he was in the hospital at Tuskegee, had a fairly rare blood type, and none of the white instructors had his blood type. So one of the black pilots gave him blood. And as the legend goes, his wife divorced him over it because she was afraid they'd have a baby that might be black because he had black blood in him. And this is a true legend that was there at the time, the story going around. But anyway, everybody wondered, was he still mad about that too, you know? Anyway, I encountered this guy, and he's a major, and he's very glum, and he just says, stand at attention. And so I did. And pretty soon, one of the instructors came in and says, is this the guy? And of course, 2 or 3 more come in, and they start to pummel me. They give me the hazing, you know. I don't know if you've ever heard of the hazing that would go on in Cadet Corps, but you're put through all kind of physical exercises and push-ups and everything, duck walking, whatever, and also grabbing a brace, and it means you can go down so many buttons and so forth. Anyway, they harassed me for an hour and a half till this instructor who had turned me in came in. And so they all asked me questions like, did you set your altimeter? Yes, I did. What altitude were you? I was at 800 feet. So, well, like I said, you were way down on the treetops, blah, blah. What were you doing? You know, and I kept answering them very politely. And it was like an interrogation. So it's almost like, you know, you give them my name and serial number type thing, look straight ahead, you know. But anyway, as soon as this instructor came in, and when he walked into the door, all the other instructors said, that Mr. called you a liar, you know. So they had set up this intimidating situation immediately. And this guy walks up and gets in my face and says, did you call me a liar, you know? And so anyway, we wrangled a little bit. I was still calm. And this major, who's never said a word, he just sat there and watched all this going on. He's very calm. So finally, he says, okay, all you guys get the hell out of my office, you know? So they all left. So he says, mister, you be down on the line tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. He says, I want you to get, and he gave me the airplane number. He said, I want you to have it ready for flight by 8:15, and we'll go up, and you're going to get a check ride. Yes, sir. He says, I want you to take off. I want you to climb to 4,000 feet. I want you to do a 2.5 turn spin to the right. I want you to recover. I want you to come down. And all the words started writing together, all these instructions, you know. So anyway, I'm out there, of course, at 10 minutes of 8, you know, and it's his airplane. And I have the flight crew alerted, hey, man, you guys help me get this thing going. So sure enough, we can't get the airplane started. You talk about a way to start a check ride, you know. So anyway, sure, he comes out with his chute over his shoulder and climbs up and says, what's the matter here? What's the problem? And I said, can't get it started. And so he says, he jumps in, and of course, and he goes through the procedure. He can't get it started either, thank goodness. So he calls for another airplane. So we get in another airplane. We take off, and we go up. I go up to 4,000, do this 2.5 turn spin to the right, and you're supposed to come out precision on a road and come back up and then go to the other side. Well, anyway, I did 3 of these spins, and you're supposed to climb up. You're not supposed to spin below 3,000 feet. So I climb back up to the legitimate altitude, and he all of a sudden cracks in the radio, do it from here, do the next one from here. So I do, and now I know I'm breaking some so-called regulations. So anyway, pretty soon I'm down to 1,500 feet, which is pretty low to start a spin, so especially in this airplane, which used to wind up pretty tight. So anyway, he says, I got it. So I don't know what that means, whether that means I'm washed out, we're going home or what, but he firewalls it and takes it back up about 1,000 feet, and he starts doing spins, right turn, right on precision. I'd never seen anything that precise. He does it, and the next thing we're on the treetops. So, and he pulls back up to altitude. He says, okay, let's go home. So I figured, oh, geez, I'm finished, you know. So the AT-6 is a pretty hard airplane to land. It's got very narrow landing gear, and it lands at pretty hot speed. So by the way, I won all the stages in landing, so I know how to land airplanes. So I've got a nice crab set up for a crosswind, and I've got it right on the money, and I'm really holding. All of a sudden, I feel pressure on the controls. So, oh, geez, I'm going to get a little help here, you know? So I really let the stick hang in my finger so it would touch. And if ever he touched it, I would just give a little bump. He literally landed the airplane. We made one of the most beautiful landings you ever see, you know? So he didn't say anything. He never said a word. So he never talks to me. He gets out of the airplane. He says, secure the airplane, and walks away. So I don't know whether I'm washed out or what. So anyway, as I go back into operations, my instructor, who was a fairly small Caucasian guy, and he comes, first lieutenant, he comes running out and he grabs me and picks me up and says, you made it, you know? I said, great. He says, I told him you were my best student I ever had, you know? He says, and he says, boy, he thinks you can fly pretty good too, you know? I said, I was beginning to wonder, you know? But anyway, that was my experience of confrontation with a so-called the upper echelon in this case. But you know, you've heard a lot of stories about antagonistic situations between the white instructors and the black students. I never encountered one. That was the closest I think I came up to that point. And nobody else seems to have had any situations. I've asked a lot of my classmates and other pilots. Nobody really has any really serious confrontations. I had another one in advance, by the way, with an instructor there too in a B-25. You know, one of the practices is when you're taking off in instruments, they line the inside windows with red material, and you put on dark glasses and you can't see. It's black to you, but they can see out. Instructor sits there in the right seat, you sit in the left, and you line up, being able to see without the without the glasses on. You line up on the runway, you set everything, and then you put the glasses on. So you're entirely in the black, you're taking off in 0-0 conditions is what it amounts to. And this particular instructor we had was a very calm, quiet guy in normal circumstances, but as you advance the throttles, as the engines went up, so did his voice. And by the time he got at the end of the runway, he's yelling and shouting at you, you know. You've done this, and he's really cussing out and everything else. So anyway, it was a practice to try to divert your attention also. So I'm up, and I'm flying along. We're at about 20 minutes, and each, by the way, you have 4 cadets in each flight. You get about an hour, maybe 45 minutes each in the seat. And so I'm the first one flying. And we're flying along in a very tough phase. This is called strange range orientation, and you're really taxing your abilities. And at the same time, he's got this running chatter going. You know, cracking on you and whatnot. So he's saying things like, hey, mister, where are you from, you know? And I tell him, I'm from Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. He says, where the heck is that, you know? I said, that's near God's country, you know? I'm really not paying that much attention to him. I'm concentrating on flying. And parrying him, so he says, any more at home like you? You know? I said, yeah, there was 4 more of us, you know? He says, boy, I bet your mother was glad to get rid of your butt, you know? And at that point, I said, leave my mother out of this, you know? So I go back to flying, and at that point, he says, get out of that seat. You know, he really jumped me, you know. You can't talk to me like that, so forth. For these other 3 guys standing there waiting to get in the seat, they were absolutely terrified because, you know, the guy's in a bad mood. Anyway, we end up, they're supposed to be out for 4 hours. We end up going home within an hour. He's thrown each one out of the seat, you know, successfully. So the guy said, it's all your fault. You got him upset, right? So we land, and he says, you're never coming up again, he says to me. Report to your barracks. So we go back to the barracks. And the guys are all saying to me, what are you going to do, bro? I'm going back down there tomorrow morning. He's going to have to do more than that to get rid of me. So sure enough, we line up in the formation, and they take the roll and whatnot. And so he comes out that morning, and he says, he greets us in this nice, quiet, refined voice. Gentlemen, he says, it's a nice, beautiful day out here today. We're going to get caught up on the flying we're behind on. He says, in fact, I feel so good today, I'm going to let Mr. Broadwater fly again. You know, so anyway, those are the closest and only confrontations I know of between instructors and students in my time down there. And I know the movie portrayed a lot of antagonism. That never happened. I never saw that happen like that or anyways close to it. And one of the reasons is we had a CO there at Tuskegee Training named Noel F. Parrish, who was white and full colonel. My understanding is, and I still haven't got confirmation totally, but all of those instructors were volunteers. And his instruction to them was, if you've got a problem, come to me, and I'll take care of it. But I don't want you interacting with the students or any of the other black officers in confrontational ways. And he kept a finger on those guys. And you know, some of them left. They'd rotate out occasionally, I guess because they didn't like it. But he certainly protected and ensured that their mission was carried out primarily as training, and he didn't let that kind of stuff. He didn't tolerate it. So I guess that's the reason. I just want people to know that was not as predicted or projected in that HBO movie. You know.
Last question.
Yes, sir.
Was it the highlight of your life, do you think?
You know, I would say in my early life, of course. But my later life was very successful, and I became the first SES in air traffic control system. I don't know if you're familiar with the SES, Senior Executive Service. And I went in as a GS6 at the bottom, and I retired as a GS16 super grade, and I was number 3 man in the air traffic system in the country. I had some very wonderful jobs. My other claim to fame is I retired in 1980. I had 34 years in service, and I became a consultant. And my last job with FAA was the head of the rules and regulations, which included, you drive around the country, you see all these lights flashing, red lights on top of buildings. Well, that's all regulated and regulatory. And I was in charge of that as one of my responsibilities. So anybody that wants to build an object must go through the FAA if it's over 200 feet. So I have, my claim to fame is, as a consultant, I've gotten 3 tallest buildings in the world approved in America. Nobody's built one yet, but the top one I just got approved last December, 2,600 feet in Chicago, about 6 blocks from the Sears building. And by the way, it's been forecast that I would have not gotten any of those buildings approved, but I got all 3 approved. And it's an interesting phase of work, and that's my claim to fame, so to speak. In fact, at one point I told the guy, I says, well, since you can't pay me, if you'll just put me down as an aviation consultant on the building, I'll be happy. You know? But anyway, we have not got one of those built. Donald Trump was the middle one in New York, and he decided not to build. Probably very good, because it might have been the target of this recent activity, you know. But anyway, the one in Chicago is still approved. It'll be good for 2 years, the approval. And it's a very narrow building. It was also the DVD transmitting site for the whole city of Chicago. But it appears that DVD is not catching on the way everybody thought. And as a result, the financing has become very difficult for him. So he's not got the financing yet to build it. But anyway, those are my shining moments, let's say.
Thank you very much.
Sure.